You got me messed up. You must have me messed up if you think I ain't gonna be quarantined. Well, I'm really not though, but you know, I gotta play along. I gotta make it seem like, you know, this is really quarantined. Nah, I'm messing with you. Yo, what it do? How everybody doing? I hope y'all doing all right in the middle of all this, you know. I go, oh, you bet I've been so amazing. I'm so emotional. Listen, I know it's been a hot minute. We're gonna get back to the scheme of things. You're gonna see me in a obviously even more informal light. So it's like, look, it's what it is. I just want to do these videos to help the learning experience a little more. To be honest, the articles is right there, the videos is there, but I still want to get into certain things just to at least help you understand like what are the main things I want you to learn and et cetera, et cetera. What I do say prior to any video that I post up in regards to like these little mini lectures, you should watch the videos that that are being presented in the syllabus. Like for example, there's a video about, you know, the person that did Mike Brown's, you know, autopsy and et cetera, et cetera. Like he was put into question because at the end of the day, when we think about criminal justice, we think about, you know, police, we think about the courts, we think about corrections. What about at the end? What if, you know, a police officer ends up shooting somebody, killing somebody? Like, basically, there has to be some system going on right there as well. And nobody would ever think to look at, you know, the person that's doing the autopsy or whatever, because you're going to assume like everything is going right. Yeah. Unfortunately, in the case of the person that was doing Mike Brown's body, unfortunately, he really, like, he wasn't certified nor qualified to even do the job. He's had a history of being messy in that specific line of work, which unfortunately has led to a lot of cases not being reopened because lawyers know that if they wanted to reopen cases that this specific individual put his hands on, then that's a whole can of worms, you know, happening, because now you have to look at, you know, was the report that he gave in regards to this autopsy even eligible? Was it even valid in the first place? So it automatically creates skepticism and doubt, not only in regards to the person that did the autopsy, but the lawyers, the whole court system as a whole. So unfortunately, there's clearly a lot of skeletons in the closet just from that in itself. So I do recommend that you watch that video. I also do recommend you watch the other videos that I've lined up there for you, you know. But let's get into this. So just to talk about today a little bit, this specific topic is Ferguson. Now, Ferguson is located in Missouri. Basically, it is a town that is predominantly Black, and the police in Ferguson at the time, and probably still to this day, were over 90% white. You know what I'm saying? You had a over 60%, you know, Black community that was being policed by over 90% white cops. And so right off the rip, it's like you have a dynamic that is just ready to combust, because not for nothing, we already understand generally and culturally that the South has been the home to a lot of racism. The South clearly benefited tremendously from slavery and from oppressing Black people. And so at the end of the day, even if we talk about the lineage of police, right, and law enforcement in general, the first form of policing here in the United States were the slave patrol, okay? So that was a Southern thing and something that began, you know, first down in the South. But a lot of the practices and a lot of the codes and, you know, ways of thinking and things of that nature, they still exist to this day, just in policing in general, but obviously still even more so in policing down in the South. So in the case of Ferguson, the reason why that name became so big was because there was just so much going around there. Obviously, one of the main things was Mike Brown. You know, Mike Brown was a teenage kid who he got into an altercation with, you know, a police officer. His name was Darren, last name Wilson, I believe. Let me double check. I think so. But basically, he got into an altercation with a police officer. There's different accounts and different, you know, testimonies as to what happened. The officer says that Mike Brown reached into the vehicle and tried to reach for his weapon. But then, you know, there's witnesses saying that Mike Brown was actually pulled into the vehicle, you know, and shots started discharging and started getting fired and whatnot. Yeah, Darren Wilson is the guy's name. But basically, long story short, Mike Brown ended up getting shot and killed. But it's not so much that he got shot and killed, but it's the fact that after being shot and killed, basically his body was left on the pavement for 4+ hours. Like, it wasn't covered, it wasn't recovered, like it was just left there, you know, to basically be on display. You know what I'm saying? And if you look at certain practices from slavery, it's like that's what they would do to slaves. You know what I'm saying? You punish a slave, you put somebody in a predicament or in a situation that is obviously unfavorable, and you let them just stay out there as an example for everybody to look at them. You know what I'm saying? And so for this to have happened in the way that it did, obviously created PTSD. You know, it brought back trauma, you know, from previous generations, because, yeah, you didn't have to live through slavery to still feel the effects of it. Because, to be honest, slavery has built a lot of our largest institutes here in the United States. The White House, some of the most prestigious universities, Ivy League universities, and things of that nature. Like, at the end of the day, people who are born into millionaire status or even billionaire status, a lot of that is from ancestors that have profited and benefited off of having slaves. Okay, so at the end, leaving Mike Brown out there, you know, to just bleed out in the concrete like that, being left like that for 4+ hours, that's heavy. You know what I'm saying? That's heavy. And that sends a strong message to the Black community that we just do not care about y'all. We don't even care about your young people, because Mike Brown, he was still a teenager when that happened. So that's basically how Ferguson got on the map. Now, the thing is, just because Ferguson, you know, got the highlight of all this doesn't mean that Ferguson is necessarily, you know, a hotspot or that it's a dangerous town or anything of that nature. There's actually cities around Ferguson that have a way higher crime rate than Ferguson. Ferguson was, for a while, considered to be one of the more manageable cities in regards to, like, you know, the activities and things that may happen there. But because of this whole situation, obviously it got blown way out the water. What continued to proliferate this, I'm using big words, you know what I'm saying, proliferate. What continues to proliferate this was the police department in Ferguson, you know, their colors came out. Their true colors came out. A lot of disrespectful emails and messaging and back and forth was discovered by them, by the Department of Justice on a federal level. They basically went through, you know, the police chief's emails and different police officers in Ferguson and found a whole bunch of racist emails. They found an email from the police chief with Ronald Reagan, you know, holding a monkey, saying, "Oh, look at Ronald Reagan talking to baby Obama," you know, stuff like that. And obviously, that's a trigger right there. And it's like, how can you be the head of police, you know, in a department and be joking around like that? What standard and what example is that going to set for everybody else in your department? None. Everybody's going to follow suit. They're going to do similar things, and they're going to feel like this is appropriate. You know what I'm saying? If it's coming from a chief of police, why would the cop on the beat not do this? You know what I'm saying? It only makes sense that it's going to happen like that. So there's obviously been a lot of, you know, back and forth in regards to Ferguson. Unfortunately, not every situation that has that same energy, you know, because riots and, you know, outbursts happen throughout the time. Like if you look at the videos, you see stores getting lit up on fire and, you know, vehicles being overturned and stuff like that. Police out here, you know, vested up in these shields, helmets, looking like they about to go to war, whatnot. But it wasn't even that long after, and not that many years ago, when over here in well, I'm not gonna say over here, but in Charlottesville, you know, basically you had a whole bunch of white supremacists who, you know, they came from everywhere. They came from the South. You had people coming from Boston. You had people linking up in Charlottesville, and they all went up there with some Home Depot tiki torches. You know what I'm saying? They came out here with them tiki torches, the joints that repel mosquitoes in your backyard. They came out walking with them joints. You know what I'm saying? They might have watched Rocket Power or something like that. You know, they asked Tito for some of his, you know, Hawaiian knowledge. I don't know, man. But them tiki torches, they came out with them. They felt some type of way, you know, and a lot of them, they was in the police's face. And you could see in some of the videos, because I posted a video on that too, that basically the police, they weren't confrontational with them in the same way that police in Ferguson were towards the Black community, you know. And this is a reoccurring theme throughout time, unfortunately. When you look at a Dylan Roof, you know what I'm saying? The dude shot a whole bunch of people up, yet he's taken to a fast food spot and he's put a bulletproof vest over him in case anybody attempts to take his life, you know. And he's basically offered fast food by the police, which, a side story, Dylan Roof, there was actually a dude who was locked up in the place that Dylan Roof was at. Like, he didn't like what Dylan Roof did, obviously, and like he put the beats on him, you know what I'm saying? Just put him out, knocked him out. So salute to that. But you have you know, the two contrasting scenarios. You got Ferguson, you got Charlottesville. Okay? They both were approached very differently. And, you know, we can see a lot of this in history as well. You have the crack epidemic, now you have the opioid epidemic, treated two completely different ways. The crack epidemic, you know, Black and brown people, they were thrown in jail for being addicts, you know, in a lot of cases. They weren't necessarily even distributing or selling. They were using it for themselves. They were high all the time. They were, you know, it was an addiction they couldn't get over. The opioid epidemic is the same thing, yet the alternative is, hey, you need rehab, you need therapy, you need some kind of assistance, and, you know, it's not right for us to incarcerate you. So, you know, when it comes to race, it's very difficult for you to talk about progress in this country and the history of this country without ever talking about race, because the reality is this country was literally based off of race. You know, a lot of things that, you know, a lot of institutes that were built and, you know, that have continued to grow throughout the years have been used off of free labor, or have been used off of the oppression of certain people, or, you know, and that oppression usually comes from a certain mentality of, you know, we're superior because of X, Y, and Z and blah, blah. So that's the contrast that I want to make. So I'm gonna share this screen right here. Basically, give me a second. Just making sure I share this. So basically, we're gonna run through a couple of things. Shut up. So what happened in Ferguson? Michael Brown, an unarmed Black teenager, was shot and killed August 9th, 2014 by Darren Wilson, a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, a suburb of St. Louis. The shooting prompted protests that roiled the area for weeks. On November 24th, the St. Louis County prosecutor announced that a grand jury decided not to indict Mr. Wilson. The announcement set off another wave of protests. In March, the Justice Department called on Ferguson to overhaul its criminal justice system, declaring that the city had engaged in constitutional violations. Going back basically to what I was mentioning earlier in regards to the police chief and things of that nature. So right here, they actually have a map as to how things, you know, kind of played out. The area of demonstrations. So these areas by violence and looting. So basically, you have the police department in Ferguson all the way over here. And then the site of Mike Brown's death, you can see right there, that small speck. And then you basically had violence happening as a result of the rallies and the riots and stuff like that. And that's basically in the yellow squares and boxes and things of that nature. The protests, you know, they weren't necessarily that far from, you know, from Mike Brown, where he originally was taken, but basically that's just like a layout right there. Here is kind of getting into some of the different sequences and scenarios. 11:54, Michael Brown and Dorian Johnson leave Ferguson Market and Liquor. Surveillance shows Mr. Brown stealing some cigarillos. I don't know why they said that in Spanish. They walk along West Florissant Avenue and then in the middle of the street on Canfield Drive. 12:01, so basically less than 10 minutes later, Officer Darren Wilson arrives alone in his vehicle. Speaking through his window, he tells two men to move to the sidewalk. He sees that Mr. Brown fits the description of a suspect in a convenience store theft. Officer Wilson makes a call to this two men. He positions his SUV to block the two men as well as traffic. All right, so here now is getting into some of the other details as well. Now, obviously, this is like on some SVU type stuff, but basically, some of the stuff that they presented here. Examiners found Mr. Brown's body, Mr. Brown's blood or other DNA outside the driver's door, outside the left rear passenger door, inside the driver's door, on the upper left thigh of Officer Wilson's pants, and on Officer Wilson's shirt and weapon. So, because in the story that Officer Wilson puts out there, and you know, he claims that he was punched by Mike Brown as well, and that's why his cheek is like, it looks inflamed right there. Basically, according to the story, Officer Wilson was he was in the vehicle and Mike Brown reached in there, where eyewitnesses also say that that Mike Brown was in the vehicle, but that he was actually snatched in there by the officer himself. All right. Here they got the paperwork in regards to the autopsy, entry, re-entry, and exit. You know, like the wounds and whatnot. So basically it's showing like where stuff, you know, where the bullets hit Mike Brown. So there was a bullet that they said that had hit Mike Brown in the hand. There was a bullet that was said to have gone through his head, which from the angle that it was, like if Officer Wilson is sitting in the vehicle and Mike Brown got hit on the top of the head, then it had to have meant that Mike Brown was kind of, you know, facing downward in a way, because Officer Wilson wouldn't, at least if he's sitting in the vehicle, wouldn't have the latitude to be able to point downwards. So it would have to have been like an upward type of shot, or something to the liking where Mike Brown's head was, you know, close in proximity to his weapon and whatnot. What did the grand jury decide? A St. Louis County grand jury made up of 9 whites and 3 blacks decided in November not to indict Officer Wilson in connection with the shooting of Michael Brown, who was 18 years old. Its task was to determine whether there was a probable cause to believe that Officer Wilson should be charged with a crime, and if so, which one? An indictment would have required 9 of the 12 grand jurors to agree. The county prosecutors released forensic reports, photographs of evidence, and transcripts of proceedings. Materials are usually kept secret. All right, so, you know, it's just a lot of mess really in regards to Mike Brown's situation as a whole. How long did the initial protest last? So Mr. Brown's death prompted weeks of demonstrations and a response from the police that included tear gas and rubber bullets. Confrontations between protesters and law enforcement continued even after Governor Jay Nixon deployed the Missouri National Guard to help quell the unrest. Since then, protests in Ferguson have persisted in smaller numbers. In early October, the Ferguson Police Department handed over responsibility for policing protests to the county police department, which is larger and better equipped. All right, this article dates back, it's from 2015. So, basically these riots were happening for some time. So basically for a couple of weeks, and then it continued to spread throughout there. What has contributed to the racial tension in Ferguson? The protests against the police have pitted the predominantly Black community against a nearly all-white police force. Of the 53 commissioned officers in the Ferguson Police Department, 4 are Black. Okay, while most of the St. Louis County is white, Ferguson and neighboring towns are predominantly Black. Blacks were once a minority in Ferguson, but the city's demography, I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on with me, has shifted in the last decade after white families moved out to surrounding suburbs. So basically here is showing you like the spread of Black communities throughout certain parts of Missouri. Okay, and as you can see, you have, in Berkeley, Jennings, Ferguson, a pretty, good population of the Black community. Is Ferguson generally a violent area? This is basically violent crime, January to June of 2014. Ferguson compared to Jennings, it's not even something that's on the radar. Ferguson and Hazelwood, not too much of a difference. Berkeley, it ranges. So I just wanted to show you that because, of course, we wanted to kind of set the tone as to what happened, at least to some extent, because these videos, they're not for us to get extremely deep into it. Like the videos that I'm putting into your assignments, but it's just to give you a general overview, and then obviously you can continue to probe and dive into the readings and into the other videos on the syllabus yourself as well. In 2019, 5 years after Michael Brown's death, his father wants a new investigation. All right, the death of Michael Brown Jr. set into motion profound changes in policing, race relations, and society that continue to reverberate. We're not stopping until we get justice, his father says. So is what you need to know. Michael Brown Sr. is still searching for answers. What happened in 2014? Let me see. At least 6 Ferguson activists have died in the past 5 years, some from apparent suicides. A body cam video shows how much policing has changed in the US and also how much it has stayed the same. Because one thing that people think about body cams is that supposedly it stops police brutality, but statistics, because body cams is still a relatively recent concept and a relatively recent technology, but the statistics that exist out there show that body cams really haven't made a tremendous difference in police brutality. Like, police are still, willing to commit a form of brutality or use of force, even with the body cameras on them, because in a lot of cases, they may know that they're still going to receive protection, and it may just lead to death duty or something of that nature. So there is that freedom and that flexibility to know, like, my department got my back if you're a police, and especially a white cop. Therapists in Ferguson say they see trauma's fingers on young patients. So when we went over PTSD in class a couple of weeks ago, we did talk about a specific town in Georgia that basically the young people there experience trauma at twice the rate as US, Iran, and Afghanistan veterans. All right. They're saying right here that basically therapists in Ferguson say they've seen trauma's fingerprints on young patients. So basically, because again, Mike Brown, he was 18. Now, the officer says that he was such a big guy that he would have never thought that he was 18, but the reality was Mike Brown was 18, regardless of how one grows and develops physically and matures physically. Like, that's a different conversation. Like the guy is still he was still 18. And so of course, other 18-year-olds that may have known Mike Brown and, you know, may have known people that knew Mike Brown, they're all going to feel some type of way. They're all going to feel a level of trauma. And, you know, they're just going to feel weird about the situation as a whole. Black drivers continue to be stopped at much higher rates than white drivers throughout Missouri, which was a big issue because you had statistics showing that Black drivers were predominantly stopped at a more alarming rate than white drivers, even though there's more white drivers, you know, in Missouri in general. 11 essential facts about Ferguson, the shooting of Mike Brown. Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson shot and killed teenager Mike Brown. We already went over that. Ferguson's majority Black city were overwhelmingly white officers. We went over that as well. We could touch on some of these statistics right here though. According to a racial profiling report from the Missouri Attorney General's office that was obtained by BuzzFeed, of the 5,000 plus traffic stops made last year, over 4,500 of them, 86% targeted Black drivers. All right. Only 684 or 12.7% targeted white drivers, even though Ferguson is almost 30% white. So that's kind of giving you those stats right there. Police and eyewitness gave contradictory accounts of the shooting. Because, you know, that's just going to come with it. When you have the blue line, the blue code of silence, you know, in trying to defend people. It's like if you come up with a lie, you basically have to come up with another lie to try to cover that lie. And so it makes things very convoluted and very difficult to kind of see through. But basically, and even as I mentioned before, like there's a lot of eyewitness testimonies and, you know, accounts that just don't even make sense. Brown's friend, Dorian Johnson, who was with him when the shooting occurred, gave this account to MSNBC. Johnson said that he and Brown had been walking on the middle of the street when a police officer approached and told them to use the sidewalk. They complied and the officer began to drive away, but then threw his car in reverse and came back alongside the teens, nearly hitting them. Johnson heard Wilson saying something like, "What do you say?" before trying to open his car door, slamming it into Brown. Then the officer reached out and grabbed Brown by the neck with his left hand. The two men struggled briefly, and then Wilson, still in his car, shot Brown once. So this is coming directly from a friend that was literally with Mike Brown. This is the account that he's given. Johnson said that he and Brown both attempted to flee, but Brown was shot a second time. After the second shot, Brown turned around and surrendered, putting his hands in the air and saying, "I don't have a gun, stop shooting." Johnson said that Wilson then approached Brown and fired several more shots, killing him. Eyewitness Piaget Crenshaw told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that she was waiting for a bus when she saw a police officer try to place Brown in his squad car. Then she saw Brown attempt to flee with his hands in the air. The officer shot Brown multiple times as Brown shot away, said Crenshaw, who has provided photographs of the scene to law enforcement. So, you know, you got different accounts basically even saying that, you know, Officer Wilson was the aggressor in this case. A private autopsy found that Brown had been shot at least 6 times, okay? But you're also talking about one of the, like the guy that did Mike Brown's autopsy, and I placed the video in the syllabus for y'all as well. Basically, he, you know, he's not considered to be a reputable individual. So even though, yeah, there's certain facts that are just undeniable, like one of the issues with this guy that did the autopsy was that he ended up washing Mike Brown's body before he was able to get, you know, fingerprints or all the important details that he needed to get off of the body first before washing. And obviously that just you basically destroyed the evidence there, which is obviously just, there's no words to really explain that. The police have refused to release the state autopsy report or any information about the investigation of what happened during the shooting, all right? And that could also be as a result of what I just mentioned. The police released information suggesting Brown had stolen from a convenience store, but that wasn't the reason Wilson stopped him. So there's a whole bunch of different things happening. The DOJ is also investigating Brown's death. Grand jury proceedings began on August 20th. Several different law enforcement agencies are involved in the response to the shooting and the protests. So we kind of already knew those things or know those things. Yeah, I don't got New York Times. They don't love me. It was on the Wall Street Journal, which unfortunately I do not have access to as well. My man Anderson Cooper looking mad serious right here. Cheer up, bro. Now, I was talking about some of the racist emails. Unfortunately, this is not something I would like to get into, but we have to because it just shows the reality of where even our law enforcement stands in regards to certain things. Ferguson's ugly racist emails. This is basically the image right here of you see Ronald Reagan and he's feeding a chimpanzee. The emails which make offensive references to President Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama, as well as Muslims and minorities. Police Captain Rick Henke and Sergeant William Mudd resigned early last month after the emails were discovered as part of the evidence in the Justice Department's scathing Ferguson report. DOJ, the federal government, basically got involved, and they investigated the Ferguson police because clearly there was just a lot of activity happening that should have been happening. One email showed Ronald Reagan, an actor before becoming president, feeding a chimp in 1951. In the 1951 comedy Bedtime for Bonzo with the caption, "Rare photo of Ronald Reagan babysitting Barack Obama in 1962. You know what I'm saying? So this just shows that there's a culture within these police departments in general, not just Ferguson, but a lot of police clearly feel like this because the reality is that even in Phoenix, there were a lot of, like in Phoenix, Arizona, there were a lot of police who were exhibiting racist behaviors and, you know, doing extreme things for like minor situations against people from the Black community or the brown community. And then there's also Facebook pages that have been discovered of police officers who actually, you know, they're basically trolling. You know, they get on social media and then they start posting ridiculous things and racist things, and basically it's basically like their own group chat for racist police. Right here, I'm not sure why it's not popping up, but this link was originally supposed to be the DOJ's link to their investigation regarding Ferguson, but I probably just have to retype it and see what's up. So one thing that Mike Brown's death did help lead to was the Black Lives Matter movement, right? So now we, you know, whenever there's police brutality or, you know, some kind of act of violence against the Black community specifically, you hear the terms and the hashtag Black Lives Matter. Now, one thing I want to get into in regards to this, because, you know, people want to jump to conclusions and they don't want to understand like why this movement was called Black Lives Matter. Listen, if your specific group of people are being marginalized, they're being destroyed, they're being assaulted, they're being killed, you know what I'm saying? And every other group compared to your group is not experiencing the same thing, like you have to make it a specific kind of movement for your group. And that's just kind of common sense, and it's kind of obvious, you know. You're gonna stand up for yours, and you should, because at the end of the day, you're just being marginalized and oppressed for what? Like, there's really not even a valid reason for the oppression. And so Black Lives Matter is not saying that white lives don't matter, that Hispanic lives don't matter, that Asian lives don't matter, that Indian lives don't matter. Like, it's not saying that. Like, clearly, quote unquote, all lives do matter, but because of what we've seen with police brutality specifically, clearly Black lives to police oftentimes don't matter. You know what I'm saying? And Black lives in a lot of cases have been taken the least serious. You have, you know, the Jewish community or the Italian community, Polish community coming in, you know, years after slavery was done. You know, they migrated over here and they were given land and loans and things of that nature before Black people. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so it's something that speaks specifically towards the history of what Black people have experienced here in the United States. Unfortunately, a lot of people want to take it as, you know, oh, what do you mean Black Lives Matter? And like, are you saying my life doesn't matter? And, you know, it's a white person saying that. That's not what Black Lives Matter is saying. It's saying your life matters too, but right now we need to focus on addressing the issues happening in the Black community, because to certain people, our lives don't matter. Our specific lives don't matter. Like if you're Black, you know what I'm saying? And so that's the whole purpose of the Black Lives Matter movement, is to create, you know, awareness and the conversation as to Black lives mattering, which clearly a life is a life, period. It should matter anyways, but people unfortunately have not treated it in such a way. So in 2013, 3 radical Black organizers, and this is straight from the Black Lives Matter website itself, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi, not sure if I pronounced it right, created a Black-centered political will and movement building project called Black Lives Matter. It was in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer, George Zimmerman. So it started with the Trayvon case, but of course, Black Lives Matter has been involved in a whole bunch of different stuff as well, because at the end of the day, there's just different things that have come out as a result of, you know, what they stand for and what have you. Black Lives Matter is an ideological and political invention in a world where Black lives are systematically and intentionally targeted for demise. It is our affirmation of Black folks' humanity, our contributions to the society, and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression. As organizers who work with everyday people, Black Lives Matter members see and understand significant gaps in movement spaces and leadership. I'm gonna jump over here real quick. As Black Lives Matter hashtag developed throughout 2013, 2014, we utilized it as a platform and organizing tool. Other groups, organizations, and individuals use it to amplify anti-Black racism across the country in all the ways it showed up. Tamir Rice, Tanisha Anderson, Maya Hall, Walter Scott, Sandra Bland, these names are inherently important. The space that Black Lives Matter held and continue to hold helped propel the conversation around the state-sanctioned violence they experienced. We particularly highlighted the egregious ways in which Black women, specifically Black trans women, are violated. Black Lives Matter was developed in support of all Black lives, all right? And then here it talks about Mike Brown. In 2014, Mike Brown was murdered by Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson. It was a guttural response to be with our people, our family, in support of the brave and courageous community of Ferguson and St. Louis, as they were being brutalized by law enforcement, criticized by media, tear gas, and pepper sprayed right after, night after night. Darnell Moore and Patrice Cullors organized a national ride during Labor Day weekend that year. We called it the Black Life Matters Ride. In 15 days, we developed a plan of action to head to the occupied territory to support our brothers and sisters. Over 600 people gathered. We made 2 commitments to support the team on the ground in St. Louis and to go back home and do the work there. We understood Ferguson was not an aberration, but in fact, a clear point of reference for what was happening to the Black community everywhere. All right, so right there is basically stating how important, the Ferguson situation was. And then basically here, the Pew Research Center gets into the hashtag Black Lives Matter. Yeah, right now it's almost 12 o'clock at midnight. So, I ain't even drink nothing. I promise you. I don't know why I'm slurring my words. I sound like a Dominican on bachata night or something like that. Hold on, let me drink a gallon of water real quick, man, because I'm like, it's crazy out here. Be like, I'm over here wilding like just like like a baby. I don't got no legging right now, man. What's happening to me? I'm tired. I ain't gonna hold you. Yeah. So going back to this. In recent years, social media have become a common way for political groups and social movements to organize. On Twitter's 10-year anniversary, the site published a list of the most used hashtags related to social causes. 2 of the top 3 were directly related to the issue of race. According to Twitter, Ferguson was the most used social media hashtag in the 10-year history of the platform, while Black Lives Matter was 3rd. All right, so that's just to show like how much attention it got. So from July 2013 to March 2016, Black Lives Matter was used 8 times as often as All Lives Matter, because basically the idea of All Lives Matter, again, it was basically to like downplay, that Black Lives Matter. Again, Black Lives Matter is not saying that all lives don't matter, but it's saying that Black lives have not been paid attention to the same way that quote unquote other lives or all lives have been paid attention to. And of course, some people also say all lives matter because they may not necessarily understand what Black Lives Matter is doing. Like you have other people from the Black community say all lives matter, but it's not necessarily them saying that Black lives don't matter. It's just sometimes there's confusion even within the community. Like the communication is not always on the same level, right? It's like if we go back to the crack epidemic, you had Black and brown people saying, yeah, say no to drugs, or lock up the drug dealers. But basically they were saying lock up my son, lock up my uncle, you know what I'm saying? Like, and they didn't realize that in them approving of this, they were approving of their own demise, because they weren't just trying to lock up, drug dealers or whatever. Like, they were trying to lock up specifically Black and brown communities during those times. So if you're talking about by 200,000 tweets and etc., Black Lives Matter has reached that number, in the mid 2014s. If we look at the first date, which is in 2013 in July. Is that July? Yeah, it's July. Hashtag Black Lives Matter first appears on Twitter. So right there, obviously showing for one time. Eric Garner dies in New York. If we go to number 2, after being arrested, then you start seeing that hashtag go up a little bit. Michael Brown is killed during an encounter, and that's number 3. Samir Rice is killed by police in Cleveland while playing with a toy gun. And, that's where you start seeing the numbers shoot up. Prosecutor announces there will be no indictment on Michael Brown case. That was the highest that ever hit. Some police officers are killed in New York while sitting in their patrol car. All right, we got number 6 right there. Now, one thing about just the term itself, like I saw a video a long time ago where there was a Black male who was on the stand, and basically he was convicted of killing a white boy, and basically while he was on the stand, like they asked him like if he had any last words, because I think he was being sentenced to like 25 to life or something, and he literally just said Black Lives Matter. So in a case like that, you're gonna have people also going, to some dark places when using certain hashtags, because it's not everybody's looking at it in the same light. I'm pretty sure he may have understood what the original hashtag was meant for specifically, but listen, he clearly used it for his own purposes. And just because somebody distorts something and uses it for a reason that it wasn't originally intended to, it doesn't mean that that the original idea was impure or that it was a wrong one in the first place. Freddie Gray dies in Baltimore, so that's number 7. Right, we talked about Freddie Gray a couple of weeks ago when it came to guns. Basically, how the closure rate in regards to solving gun violence in Baltimore, it dropped dramatically once riots in Baltimore started happening because of Freddie Gray's murder and his death. Shooting at church in Charleston, South Carolina, kills 9 people. All right, we got it at 8. Sandra Bland is found hanged in Texas jail cell. The numbers jump up exponentially right there. Bernie Sanders defends Black Lives Matter in debate. It jumped. So basically, Bernie was like the 4th highest in the 2016 Oscars. Because, the Black actors and actresses, they basically, the Oscars saying that, they historically don't give the Oscars to Black actors and actresses. Like me, I like to listen to hip hop, right? So Jadakiss, he came out with the song "Wild" like a long time ago, and he said, "Why Denzel had to be crooked before he took it?" Basically talking about his role in Training Day. Like Denzel had many other roles prior to that, and basically it took for Denzel to be a bad cop for him to win his first Oscar. And granted, it was an amazing performance. Training Day, that's a classic. That's a classic. I could watch that over and over, but why Denzel had to be crooked before he took it? You know what I'm saying? Like, he has a catalog of movies that he hasn't been nominated for or hasn't won an Oscar for, but the one time that Denzel, as a Black man, decides to be a police officer, and he's a crooked one at that, and like very crooked, it's like that's when they give him the Oscar. When like he portrays a very misogynist or just a very bad image of what you would want somebody to be. You know what I'm saying? And this isn't news. This has happened historically. In the early 1900s, you had Hattie McDaniel, who, she was featured in the film Gone with the Wind, and basically she was nominated for an Oscar, and she wasn't even allowed to sit in the Oscar for her own nomination because it was that racist during that time. So the reality is that Black Lives Matters. It's also gone into like entertainment, mainstream media, things of that nature, not just only criminal justice or social justice related phenomenons and issues. And the reality is, like the ACLU said, Black Lives Matter is not necessarily so much a civil rights, movement as much as it is a human rights movement, because all it's trying to establish is that if your life matters as a white man, white woman, whatever, then as a Black male, Black female, whatever, like basically I have the same God-given rights as you. And so that's pretty much, let me see if I got anything else. I think that's pretty much most of, that's pretty much most of what we had to cover. This is a pretty lengthy video. Usually I would try to keep them, mosquito trying to get over. I would try to keep them around 30 minutes, but Ferguson is a pretty lengthy thing to talk about. But hopefully this answers the questions. I'm gonna post the answers, not the answers. I'm gonna post the questions along with this link in it. And if you have any questions regarding anything else, the final paper, other assignments, things of that nature, please feel free to holler. I'm out here. You out there. Hopefully your quarantine is pleasant. And we'll catch you soon.